All right. Hey, I hope you can hear me. My phone's pretty far away, but I figured it out. All the people that I've been asking for help, Ecutech, my tuner, who sees this video, he's not going to like that. But nobody that I could reach out to could tell me why my car was doing this or doing what I'm going to go over with you and I've talked about in previous videos. So I've got a long list of a data log, recorded information that I recorded tonight. First night I've been able to get out and do a run with my car. It was raining the last couple of days, but I've got some interesting information to pass along. And man, I think I got it figured out by myself. So hang tight. I'm going to go over some of the information with you and share what I found out. All right? I'm going to bring up a couple of points. First of all, when I did my runs, I had just filled up, maxed out my tank, about $58, $59. Gas is about $3.22 here per gallon for super. So I just filled up my tank. So obviously running with a full tank compared to less of a tank, you're going to have a lot more weight in the car. So it's optimum. You want to run the car, with a lower fuel level. And that's another point with the AMS, low pressure fuel pump. You will be able to run the car realistically with less fuel in there, a quarter of a tank. In my situation with my car, I could even see when I was half a tank that I was getting some fuel cuts. And so maybe what I would try to do would be over a half a tank at 3/4 of a tank. And obviously that adds, a fair amount of more weight per gallon of fuel in the car. So I just wanted to bring that up. Plus, I wanted to touch base on the install. The install was fairly easy. I had a friend, maybe a month before that called me up and was like, man, I had my lower AMS, lower fuel pump installed. And he was like, I need to make an adjustment to it. You want to come over and help me? And so I came over to his house and I helped him. And so we pulled the bucket system out and jacked with that. And so I saw it. So I felt a lot more comfortable after seeing it. Before that, I probably would not have tackled this. I was really hesitant in getting fuel spilled in my car, and just the process of messing with the fuel pump in my mind was just not a good idea. But once I saw him do it, and I helped him just assist and hold something here and push something here, push something there, I felt a lot more comfortable with it. So when I did it the other day, it really wasn't that big of a deal. I followed the AMS instructions from their website, and then another gentleman's that I mentioned in the other video. I watched his videos a couple times, and that was helpful too. I think Passion Driven, it was his YouTube channel. But install was really fairly easy. Nothing went wrong. And I had a couple of days to do it, so I wasn't in any big hurry. I took my time and I did it right. Also want to mention, and this is a big deal, when I was pulling that out, I had no idea, when I was looking down into my gas tank, what was hold 16, 17 gallons or 15 gallons, there's no baffles in there. So, and I never really, because I had my seat always in the back, I didn't hear that gas sloshing around. But I left my seat out in the corner over there in my garage, and I drove around for a couple of days without my seat in the rear of the car. And I put more fuel in the gas tank, and it sounded like I had a pool, an actual pool in my back seat with it sloshing around. And so that's another key thing is, that in our fuel tanks with no baffles to limit the flow of the fuel and the sloshing around. I don't understand how, car manufacturers today, unless it's just a family car or, a peon, run around car for trips and stuff just every day, a $20,000 car that gets, 40 miles a gallon, while anyone would make a fuel tank and not have any baffles in it to stop the flowing around. If you're racing around corners and you take a hard right and the gas sloshes up against the side towards the back and your fuel pump is starving for fuel, or you do a a launch like I'm doing, and all your fuel gets sloshed to the back, and your fuel pump's not getting a full solid suction of fuel of where the fuel pump's located. So it's just a bad idea, and I never really thought about whether this was a baffled gas tank or a non-baffled gas tank, but it's clearly a non-baffled gas tank. Like I said, when I was driving around without my seat in there, I mean, it was just sloshing around. I mean, it literally sounded like I had a kid's pool in the back of my car on my trunk, and just driving normal with the gas sloshing around, just the sounds of water sloshing and slapping around. So people may not have known that, but that's the case with our gas tanks. It's a non-baffled gas tank. So this AMS low pressure fuel pump is supposed to handle the suction process a little bit better. So you can actually run, from my understanding from listening to people, that you can run the car with less fuel in it, and less fuel is going to equal less weight. So that fuel pump's going to have a easier time sucking the fuel as it's sloshing around, or it's going to hold more fuel in between the process of it sucking more in. So it's going to allow your car to not starve from fuel. So other than that, I mean, I just wanted to bring that to everybody. So here we go. I got a lot of information to share. I got 2 data logs in general. I've got hundreds of data logs that I could show, but we're just going to concentrate on 2 of my data logs that kind of show what I've been experiencing in this car for maybe the last 2 years, which has been driving me bonkers. And now, imagine that. I added up. I saw BMW guys on YouTube saying you've got a mandatory add a fuel pump, the lower fuel pump, not the high pressure fuel pump. But when you get up into the 400 to mid 400 range, 430, 450, you gotta get a fuel pump. And I've never heard anybody tell on a basic car on 93 tuned that it's mandatory that you need to get a fuel pump. Flat out, I've never heard that before. It's like if you get tuned and you're running about 430, 450 horsepower, you're going to need to get a fuel pump. I never heard that. I never heard it. So it's important. And now that I've got the fuel pump, I put 2 and 2 together, and I was like, man, maybe it's the fuel pump. I talked to Hussein, and no mention of upgrading the fuel pump and fix the problem. Ecutech told me when I talked to them a year ago, they were like, we just don't know. Every new model of the car in Nissan Infiniti changes up the ECU programming, and we have to hunt it down and figure out what's going on and what they changed. And we don't know a lot of what's been changed in the 2019 ECM. And he said there's a lot that had been changed. So they were basically focusing on telling me that my transmission part of my ECM, the TCM, was the culprit, and what's causing my car to lose all this throttle and all this power between my first gear and my second gear. And so, it's just been a battle. But let me share this information with you now, because I got it figured out. I figured it out. Okay, let me see how I can get all this information to you. So basically, between these 2 maps I'm going to show you, and you're just going to have to trust me, because this video would turn into an hour long. The factory, and I'm just going to touch on a lot of points. The factory, and with the AMS fuel pump installed. So with the factory fuel pump, I'm running a little bit detuned 93 with torque, with boost limits to try to get wheel traction, because my car is just torching the tires. And so they're close. So the factory on the 1 data log was, first gear was 14.7 psi, and that was about max, and it tapered down a little bit. And then second gear was up to about 17.1 psi, and third gear towards the end of my 0 to 70 run was 20.09 psi. I had Hussein turn my psi up just a little higher for my higher gears, but yet they taper down quickly, so don't get worried. And then with my AMS fuel pump installed, doing a similar run. The weather's a little bit different, it's a little bit cooler tonight, but my first gear is 16.1 psi for first gear, and second gear was 16.7 psi, and third gear was 20.09 psi again. So close, 14.7, and it boosted up to about 16.1 with the AMS. And so the boost is seeing better because these huge fuel cuts that I was seeing, and you're just going to have to look at my data logs. I'm going to point these out. I was getting huge, massive cuts in throttle input. The ECM was obviously seeing fueling problems. It's 99.8% what I figured out, that I can tell you that it's fueling problems that were causing this. So my throttle cuts on my first data log, or my data log that has the problem that I've been discussing and been pretty angry about for 2 years, is that the throttle cuts happened in two big places, but they started out at cutting the throttle 62.62% and took it down to 0.18%, and then a few milliseconds later, maybe 20 milliseconds later, it cut the throttle again because it was starving for fuel, and it dropped it down to 0.78. So it dropped down and then dropped really down to 0.18 of my throttle input. So the throttle was almost just 100% chopped. And then the second throttle chop it did, because it was seeing fueling issues, it went down to 0.78, and then finally it arced up a little bit, and then it just plummeted down to 0.16%. And this is all this is when I'm doing my launch control. And I'm going to try to not make this so boring for people, but all in all, I'm just going to share with you, spill the beans. Now that I got the AMS fuel pump, that low pressure fuel pump in there, my throttle jumps up, from launch control up to 100%, and I had a little bitty drop in throttle input on now that my AMS was installed, but that's likely because I'm getting massive wheel spin again, and the wheel spin is just crazy now that I'm getting fuel, and so it dropped down to like 0.95, 0.95, just a little bitty dip. And then it was all 100% throttle. And so it resolved all my 0.18, 0.16 throttle cuts that I've been experiencing for like a year and 9 months. So it fixed it. But also too, I want to just share, when I was with the factory fuel pump, my car was not revving out in RPM. So my RPM on the first data log that shows the factory fuel pump, my car was only revving up to about 5,500 RPM. And now that I've got the AMS fuel pump in there, it revved up in first gear to 5,975 RPM. And then when I had the factory fuel pump in there, when it dropped from the 75 RPM, it dropped down and it had a hiccup. It had a hiccup, it tried to catch back up, and then it dropped again. And so it had this hiccup. And that throws my boost off. And that's why my boost was 14.7, 17.1, and lower boost PSI, because the throttle's being cut. So when the ECU is cutting the throttle, of course turbo boost is going to drop. Fuel trim low term and fuel trim short term were higher with the AMS fuel pump in there. I have the numbers written down, but I'm not going to bore you to death. When my factory fuel pump was in there, I was seeing in the mid 80s to the low 90s max with my short-term fuel trim. So in short, my adding the AMS fuel pump has been a big benefit. The negative of that is now I'm getting even more wheel spin. And so I cranked out 1.93, 60 foot tonight, but I had big wheel spin and more than I've had in the past because now I'm getting fuel. And then my 0 to 60 was in the 4.0 area, 4.09, 4.06, just because of the wheel spin. So I got to get my wheel spin under control, get an option, an LSD or some drag slicks or something like that. But very, very interesting that the fuel pump has basically fixed my problem that I couldn't get fixed by professional people in the industry dealing with this car. So this is big news. So, I mean, if you're Signature Edition rear-wheel drive 3.0 T turbo car, so I can't say the 16s, the 17s, and the 18s are suffering from this, but the 19s and the 20s got new software programming from what Ecutech told me and from what Austin Infinity told me. And so it may be affecting the 19, 20, 21, 22 cars. So if you're having, most people aren't data logging to this depth that I'm doing, and they're not as concerned with these things as I am, or they're just not as smart in this area. I mean, I'm just trying to think of a way of saying that. I love reading data logs, and I think data logs are the key to success and making sure the car's running right. Make sure the car is running faster, because if it's running right, it's going to run faster, it's going to run cooler, it's going to run more efficient. So very, very interesting that my AMS fuel pump addition that I put on this car has helped me so much. So other than that, I won't bore you with any more information. I think this is really, really cool. I'm really, really excited. If I can get traction, then I can be a 3.7, a 3.8, 0 to 60 likely, and 1.7, 60 foot if I can get traction. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Sorry if this video is too long and a little bit boring, but it's not boring to me. It's very interesting stuff. But here's all this information that I wrote down. Won't bore you with that. So thanks for tuning in. Catch me on another video.